Before the world knew his name, before the headlines called him a monster, he was just a quiet, withdrawn child growing up in a house filled with secrets. The story you're about to hear isn't just about a killer, it's about a broken boy no one saved. His childhood wasn't just difficult, it was disturbing. The kind of home where screams were normal, affection was absent, and fear was the only language spoken. Most people think serial killers are made the moment they commit their first crime. But what if I told you his descent into darkness started long before that, long before the first victim, the first blood, the first body? What if the most terrifying part of his story isn't what he did as an adult, but what he survived as a child? Asterisk. Asterisk, he was the kind of man you'd pass on the street and never think twice about. Not particularly tall, not particularly strong. No tattoos, no dark sunglasses, no angry scowl. He blended in perfectly to the people around him. He was quiet, maybe a little awkward, but harmless. He lived alone in a small apartment on the second floor of a rundown building where no one asked questions. He didn't throw parties. He didn't bring home guests. The most anyone saw of him was the occasional nod in the hallway or a tired wave at the corner store. His landlord said he paid rent on time. His boss said he did his job without complaints. To the outside world, he was invisible, but not in a way that raised concern. In a way that made people forget he was even there. But that invisibility, that stillness, was the most dangerous thing about him, because deep beneath that ordinary surface was something far darker. Something that had been festering for years. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, methodical, like rot spreading through a foundation. No one noticed because he had learned from an early age how to hide, how to keep everything inside. He never shouted, never cried, never lashed out in public, but behind closed doors, in the silence of his room, his thoughts were anything but calm. They were violent. They were obsessive. And they were growing stronger. This was not a man who suddenly lost control. He was a man who had never truly had control to begin with. His childhood had stripped that away from him. What little hope or joy he had once known was buried beneath years of trauma, emotional starvation, and constant rejection. And over time, the wounds left behind by that childhood didn't heal. They hardened into coldness, into detachment, into the belief that people were objects, that pain was power, and that violence was not just a release, but a right. What made him so terrifying wasn't just the crimes he committed. It was the fact that no one saw it coming, not a single person. Not his neighbors, not his coworkers, not the few who spoke to him in passing. There were no arrests, no fights, no obvious warning signs. He had spent his entire life perfecting the mask he wore, and when he finally took it off, the world was horrified by what lay beneath. His first victim wasn't chosen at random. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned, precise, carried out with a level of emotional detachment that stunned even seasoned investigators. And when they looked into his past, into his childhood, into the years he spent alone and ignored, they began to understand something even more disturbing. This man didn't just become a killer. He was shaped into one, sculpted by silence, forged in pain. He didn't stand out because he knew exactly how to blend in. And that's what made him the perfect predator. Asterisk. Before he was a killer, he was just a boy, small, quiet, and already afraid of the world. His home was not a place of safety. It was a battleground, the kind of place where the walls absorbed more screams than laughter, where footsteps in the hallway meant something bad was coming, and where silence wasn't peace, it was a warning. He grew up in a house ruled by chaos. His father, when he was around, was a shadow of a man, violent, unpredictable, a drunk who treated discipline like punishment and love like weakness. His mother, overworked and emotionally broken, had long since given up trying to protect him. She became cold, distant, almost robotic. She fed him, clothed him, but never hugged him, never told him she loved him. His childhood memories weren't of birthday candles or bedtime stories. They were of slammed doors, broken dishes, and nights spent crying quietly into a pillow, hoping no one would hear. There was no safety, no comfort, no tenderness. From the moment he could walk, he learned how to stay out of the way, how to shrink himself down, how to avoid eye contact when his father's temper flared, how to read the room before speaking, how to pretend he wasn't hurt or hungry or scared. And when the beatings started, those sharp, punishing bursts of rage, he stopped crying altogether. He learned that pain was a part of life, that no one was coming to save him, that survival meant silence. At school, he was the kid who sat alone, the kid who never raised his hand, the kid who stared out the window even when the teacher called his name. Other children avoided him. He didn't play. He didn't laugh. And when he did speak, it was with a hollow, flat tone, like someone imitating emotion but not feeling it. Some teachers noticed. Some wrote it down in reports. But nothing ever happened. No one came to visit the house. No one followed up. He slipped through every crack in the system, and deep down, he began to believe something dangerous, that no one cared about him, that people were cruel, that love was a lie. His understanding of the world twisted into something dark. If no one was going to protect him, then maybe one day he would stop protecting anyone else. That seed, planted in childhood, slowly took root, not all at once. But over time, it grew, fed by rejection, pain, and years of emotional starvation. He didn't wake up one day and decide to kill. He was made into something broken bit by bit over years of abuse and neglect. By the time he became a man, he was already emotionally hollow. But the rage had never gone away, and it was only a matter of time before it came out. Asterisk. The warning signs were there quietly, unmistakably, but no one paid attention. Even as a child, he was different, not just quiet, but unnervingly still. He didn't cry when other kids got hurt. He didn't laugh at cartoons. He didn't flinch when someone shouted near him. There was a coldness in his eyes even back then, like he was always watching but never connecting. Some teachers thought he was just shy. Others that he had trouble focusing, but what they didn't realize was that he wasn't distracted. He was disassociated, detached, already emotionally drifting away from the world around him. At age 7, his mother found a box hidden under his bed. Inside were the bodies of small animals, birds, mice, a neighborhood cat. He had wrapped them neatly in plastic bags, as if preserving them. When she asked why, he simply said, "I wanted to see what was inside." No tears, no shame, no explanation. She beat him for it, of course, but never spoke of it again. Just another secret buried in a house full of silence. By 10, he had started lighting fires, small ones at first. Trash bins, curtains, once the edge of a classroom display board. Each time, he claimed it was an accident, but the way he watched the flames told another story. It wasn't panic in his eyes, it was fascination. He didn't fear destruction. He admired it. His cruelty grew bolder with age. In middle school, a classmate was hospitalized after a playground accident. No one could prove he pushed the boy, but the look on his face when they asked him, that eerie, motionless stare, was unforgettable. Even the principal said later, there was something about that child. Like he had no soul. He never had real friends, not one. The few kids who tried to talk to him gave up quickly. He didn't know how to hold a conversation. He'd say things that made people uncomfortable, strange questions, comments with no emotion. Once, during a class discussion about death, he casually said, "I think people are more interesting when they're dead." The room went silent. The teacher brushed it off, just another odd comment from a quiet boy. But it wasn't just odd. It was dangerous. Psychologists today would recognize these patterns immediately. Animal cruelty, fire starting, social detachment, emotional numbness. These are the classic early traits of a budding psychopath. But back then, no one cared. No. One intervened. No one asked why he was getting worse year after year. The truth is, everyone saw the red flags. They just chose to ignore them. As he entered his teenage years, something inside him began to change, and not in the usual coming-of-age way. For most kids, adolescence is confusing but filled with growth. For him, it was a descent. A slow, steady spiral into isolation, darkness, and emotional collapse. He barely spoke at school. When he did, it was often inappropriate, cold, or confusing. He'd stare at other students too long, sometimes without blinking, as if studying them, not in admiration, but in detachment. As if they were puzzles, not people, he became obsessed with control of space, of silence, of power. He hated being told what to do. Teachers said he would sit through entire periods without writing a single word, not out of defiance, but because he didn't care. The world held no value to him. People were irrelevant, rules were suggestions. He started keeping a notebook, not for assignments, but for something else. It was filled with violent sketches, strange codes, and pages describing the anatomy of animals and humans. One page had a list of named students and teachers with words like weak, liar, and watch scribbled beside them. Another had a chilling sentence scrawled over and over. Control is peace. His mother had stopped trying to reach him by then. Their home was now a place of silence and routine. She worked double shifts and came home only to sleep. They rarely spoke, and when they did, it was usually an argument. He had become a stranger in his own home, and no one seemed to notice or care. Then came the first real outburst. He was 16. A teacher asked him to stay after class about a failed assignment. Witnesses say he stood there without speaking for almost a full minute, just staring. Then, without a word, he snapped the pencil in his hand, walked to the back of the classroom, and punched a hole in the wall. The teacher was shaken but chalked it up to stress. No call home, no report filed. Just another warning sign dismissed like a passing storm cloud. But the truth is, that moment wasn't an outburst. It was a fracture, one of the first cracks in the mask he had been wearing for years. For so long, he had buried his emotions. But now, they were starting to escape, and they weren't emotions anymore. They were something colder, sharper, more dangerous. He began withdrawing even further. He stopped making eye contact altogether. He wandered the streets at night, sometimes for hours, walking alleys and watching homes through windows. He wasn't looking for anything. He was imagining, planning, fantasizing about what it would feel like to hurt someone, to stop being invisible, to finally take control in the most absolute way possible. The spiral had begun. And no one knew. No one stopped it. And worst of all, no one asked what was coming next. Asterisk. It was a cold night in late autumn, the kind where the streets are empty and the silence feels heavier than usual. He had been walking for hours again, wandering without destination. But this time, something was different. He wasn't just thinking. He was ready. For weeks, his mind had been building the moment, rehearsing it in silence, imagining the sound, the feeling, the aftermath. It wasn't about rage. It wasn't about revenge. It was about curiosity and control. He wanted to know what it would feel like to cross that line, to take a life or at least come close. The victim was a boy from the neighborhood, younger, smaller, innocent, someone who had once mocked him in passing, a forgettable insult in the hallway, a quick laugh with friends. But to him, it wasn't forgotten. Nothing ever was. He followed him quietly, calmly, down a side street, then into a narrow alley between two crumbling buildings. There were no witnesses, no cameras. Just the flicker of a broken streetlight and the echo of distant traffic. What happened next was short but brutal. He struck without hesitation. A rock, a chokehold, a flurry of violence that ended as suddenly as it began. The boy survived barely. He was hospitalized with head trauma, cuts, and bruises. He told police he didn't see who attacked him. It was too fast, too sudden, too dark, just a shadow. And then nothing. There were no arrests. No suspects, no evidence, just another unsolved assault in a bad part of town. But for him, it changed everything. He had done it. He had hurt someone, controlled them, reduced them to nothing with his bare hands. And the feeling, it wasn't guilt, it was relief. A calm washed over him afterward, like something inside him had finally aligned. He returned home, washed the blood from his hands, sat down at the kitchen table, and ate dinner like nothing had happened. From the outside, the boy was fine, the case was cold, and life moved on. But inside him, something had awakened. The fear was gone, the hesitation was gone. And now the only thing left was the hunger for more. After that first attack, something inside him shifted. It was like a switch had been flipped, not just emotionally, but chemically. The fear he used to feel, the hesitation, the weight of consequence, all of it was gone, replaced by a chilling calm. For the first time in his life, he felt powerful, in control, like the years of being ignored, beaten down, and pushed aside had finally reversed. Hurting someone wasn't just an act, it was a transformation. And now he was hooked, but he didn't rush into chaos. He wasn't sloppy, he was methodical. Weeks passed before his second strike, and it was different this time, more deliberate. He chose an older victim, a man who lived alone, someone he had watched from a distance for weeks. He learned his habits, memorized his routine, even followed him home once or twice. It was like he was studying prey, not for revenge, not for thrill, but for control. The murder was clinical, quick, quiet, no theatrics. Just calculated violence and a disturbing level of composure. He didn't leave a mess. He didn't leave fingerprints. In fact, investigators later described the scene as eerily clean, almost surgical. And this became his signature, not a calling card left behind, not a clue taunting the police, but the absence of anything at all. His crime scenes were cold, sterile, as if the act itself was enough. No need to brag, no need to boast. He didn't want fame. He wanted silence, obedience, submission. Each victim after that followed a similar pattern. Always someone vulnerable, always after a period of surveillance, and always executed with the same disturbing calm. No emotional outbursts, no erratic behavior. He didn't kill in rage. He killed in ritual. Police didn't see a connection at first. The victims were different ages, races, lifestyles. But beneath the surface, there was a pattern, a rhythm, something deeper, psychological, something only someone like him could create. The press dubbed him the Phantom because he left nothing. No DNA, no trace, no motive, and while the city panicked, he watched quietly from a distance, from a crowd. From a window across the street, he read the papers, watched the reports, studied their confusion, and felt something close to joy, because now he was the one in control, and he wasn't planning to stop. The day the mask cracked and the monster came into focus, for years he had moved through life like a ghost, a predator hidden in plain sight. He stalked, he killed, and then he vanished. No evidence, no mistakes, no witnesses. He was precise, unemotional, calculated, and that's exactly what made him dangerous. But no killer is perfect forever. It wasn't a dramatic mistake. No blood-soaked crime scene or reckless getaway. It was something small, something human. His last victim was different, stronger than he expected. She fought back, scratched his face, bit his hand. And when she broke free, she ran, bleeding, terrified, but alive. And she remembered his eyes. That one detail cracked everything open. A facial composite, a public alert. A witness who recognized a man from her apartment building, quiet, always alone, never friendly. Within days, police had a name. And a week later, they had a search warrant. What they found inside his apartment chilled even the most seasoned investigators. There was no blood, no weapons, but there was order, files, notes, hand-drawn maps of alleyways, floor plans, routines, dates and times, surveillance logs. It wasn't just a killer's lair, it was an archive of obsession, cold, clinical, and obsessive. Each victim cataloged like a case study, like they weren't people. Just entries in his private collection of control. When they arrested him, he didn't resist. Didn't scream, didn't deny a thing. He simply looked up at the officer, almost relieved, and said, "You took long enough." In the interrogation room, he was calm, cooperative, even polite. He described his crimes in chilling detail, not out of pride, but clarity, as if he were explaining how to fix a car or make a cup of coffee, emotionless, mechanical. When asked why he did it, he didn't flinch. They were weak. "I was tired of being weak." There was no remorse, no sorrow, just a deep, quiet belief that what he did had purpose, that he was in control for the first time in his life. He spoke of his childhood, briefly, without emotion. Called it irrelevant noise, said the people who heard him weren't victims, they were training. The detectives who interviewed him said it felt like sitting across from something hollow. Not a man, not even a monster, just a void. A shell shaped by years of silence, rejection, and pain. His capture was national news. People couldn't believe someone like him had lived unnoticed for so long, but the truth was, he was never really invisible. We just weren't looking closely enough. The courtroom became a theater of horror, but he showed no fear. The trial began months later, but the fear in the community never faded. The headlines were relentless. The Phantom faces justice, ordinary men, unthinkable crimes. People came from all over just to watch him enter the courthouse, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who had haunted their city like a ghost. He sat in court like a statue. No emotion, no expression, dressed in a plain suit, hands folded neatly. In his lap, he barely blinked as prosecutors described his crimes in graphic detail. Photos of the crime scenes, surveillance notes, forensic timelines laid out for the world to see. But to him, it was just noise. He watched it all unfold like he was a spectator at someone else's trial. His defense team attempted the impossible. They argued insanity, that he wasn't responsible, that the trauma from his childhood had twisted his mind beyond repair, that he was, in their words, a product of lifelong abuse, not a born predator. But the evidence told another story, one of premeditation, pattern, and precision. He wasn't out of control. He was in complete control. Victims' families sat just feet away, forced to listen as their loved ones were discussed like case files. And he never once turned to look at them, not when a mother wept describing her daughter's final phone call, not when a brother shouted, "You ruined our lives," from the gallery. He sat still, cold, as if their pain only confirmed something he already believed, that people are weak. And weakness doesn't matter. Psychiatrists testified. Some said he was emotionally dead inside. Others argued he was fully aware, but deeply disturbed. One expert called him a shell of a human with a monstrous intellect. Another warned that if ever released, he would kill again without hesitation. After weeks of testimony, the jury took just hours to decide. Guilty on all counts. The judge, in one of the most somber moments of the trial, said, "You did not simply take lives. You erased them, quietly, without conscience. And you sat in this courtroom with the same silence you gave your victims. You will never walk free again." He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, no appeals, no chance for release, just the cold, permanent silence of a concrete cell. And yet, as the sentence was read, he smirked, just for a second, barely visible. But it was there, as if even in judgment, he had won. As if this was never about freedom. It was about power, and even behind bars, he knew the world would never forget his name. The crimes are over, but the damage, that never ended. He may have been locked away, but his shadow never left. Long after the trial ended and the cell door slammed shut, the ripples of his crimes continued to spread. Families shattered by grief, the community left questioning how they missed the signs. A generation of parents suddenly locking their doors tighter, checking on their children more often, wondering what evil might still be hiding in plain sight. He spent the rest of his life behind bars, quiet, obedient, unbothered. Prison guards describe him as emotionless. He didn't speak unless spoken to, never caused problems, never lashed out. Just sat in his cell, reading, writing, and staring through the bars like a man who had nothing left to lose and nothing to regret. Some say he died long before his sentence ever began. Over the years, journalists tried to interview him, authors offered book deals, true crime fans sent letters begging for insight. But he ignored them all. Whatever he had to say, he had already said with blood, with silence. With eyes that saw people as prey eventually, he died in that cell alone. No family, no visitors, no obituary, but death didn't erase the fear he left behind. The apartment complex where he once lived now stands abandoned. Locals swear it's cursed. Some claim to hear footsteps at night. Others say lights flicker when you walk past his old window. Urban legends have taken root, whispers of a man whose presence still lingers. Long after his body rotted away, his story became a case study in criminal psychology. Professors lecture about his patterns. Detectives reference his precision. Documentaries, podcasts, and crime channels just like this one continue to dissect how a quiet boy became a cold-blooded killer. But maybe the most terrifying part of his legacy is how normal he seemed. He wasn't a monster from a movie. He didn't wear a mask or stalk in the shadows. He was just a man. A man shaped by pain, neglected by society, and ignored until it was far too late. And in the end, the question he leaves behind isn't just why did he do it? It's how many others like him are out there, still waiting, still watching, and still unnoticed. He died in a concrete box. No ceremony, no final words. No family to claim his body. The world moved on. The headlines faded. And the cell he spent his last years in was swept clean for the next forgotten name. For most, the story ended there. But if you're listening closely, you'll realize it didn't, because stories like his never truly end. They linger like smoke in the corners of your memory, like a shadow that stretches longer than it should. The crimes may have stopped, but what he left behind still crawls beneath the surface. People love to say he was a monster. It makes them feel safe, like there's a wall between men like him and people like us. Monsters live in forests, in fairy tales, in stories. But he didn't. He lived in the apartment next door. He stood behind you in line. He walked the same streets. He was never a monster. He was human, terrifyingly human, and that's what makes this story so disturbing. He wasn't hidden in darkness. He was the darkness hiding in daylight. He was overlooked, ignored, forgotten, and that invisibility didn't protect us. It created him, because before the blood, before the headlines, there was a boy. A boy who was beaten, silenced, and left to rot in plain sight. And while the world turned its back, that pain grew into something else. Something colder, smarter, more dangerous. He learned that silence was power, that no one was watching, that no one cared. And when he finally snapped, it wasn't out of rage. It was out of control. control he never had as a child. Control he stole from his victims, one by one, silently, methodically, like he was fixing something broken inside himself. And maybe that's what should haunt us the most, not the crimes, not the victims, but the invisibility that made him possible. How many times could someone have stopped him, a teacher, a neighbor, a stranger, on a bus who looked too long and sensed something was off? How many missed chances does it take to build a killer? Because while his story is over, the pattern isn't. There are others out there. Right now, sitting quietly in classrooms, watching from behind apartment blinds, learning the same lessons, that they don't matter, that no one's paying attention. That pain can be swallowed until it turns into something else, something fatal. So ask yourself, what would you do if someone like him lived next door? Would you smile politely and go about your day? Would you ignore the warning signs? Would you see the shadow behind the smile? Or would you notice what the rest of the world missed? Because the next one won't wear a mask. He won't growl, he'll be quiet, ordinary, just like this one was, and by the time we realize it, he'll already be gone.